Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Dr. Paul Seebohm, retired professor in the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of Iowa, enjoys a reputation as a leading allergist in the state and in the nation. For 21 years, he was director of the Internal Medicine's Allergy Section. Dr. Seebohm helped to establish the Family Practice Program at Iowa, which is a program for training family physicians. For the last 45 years, he taught in the College of Medicine, treated patients, did research, published, and served as Associate Dean and in other capacities in the Dean's office. Dr. Seebohm was selected as President of the American Academy of Allergy and the President of the Iowa Medical Society. He's chaired many other local, state, and national organizations and committees. He has received numerous awards and honors. Among the many honors are Alpha Omega Alpha, Diplomate of the American Board of Internal Medicine, the Iowa Internist of the Year Award in 1976, winner of the second annual Governor's Volunteer Award. In 1988, he was a recipient of the University of Iowa Distinguished Alumni Award, the Distinguished Achievement Award from the Department of Internal Medicine in 1991, and one of the most prestigious, which is only given every 10 years, he received the 1994 Iowa Medical Society Distinguished Service Award. And I want to tell you, these are just a few of his awards. I wish I had time to mention them all of them, but just know his curriculum vitae tells a story of a man who has dedicated his life to medicine, the specialty of allergy and immunology, education, patient care, and service. Dr. Seebohm and his wife Dorothy have a married daughter, Karen Jackson, who lives in Iowa City. Welcome to One of a Kind, Dr. Seebohm. I'm going to call you Paul, if that's all right.
That's fine.
I know your story begins in Cincinnati, Ohio, where you were born in 1916, January 13th. I'd love to hear about your mom and your father. What did your father do? And
Well, my family was what you would call a normal family. My mother and father had no special domestic problems that were ever apparent. I had a sister and a brother. My sister was 5 years older, brother 10. And my mother was always home when I came home from school. We always had dinner at 5 o'clock. If you were not home at 5 o'clock, in time for dinner, you didn't have dinner. My father never once corrected me significantly that I can remember. Of course, I was a good boy.
oh, okay.
I used to get A's in conduct and effort in grade school.
Good.
But my father was a police officer, and he had moved up in the ranks by the time I came along, and was a supervisor of a district in the police department. And in that kind of a position, he spent an awful lot of time on the job. He had a sort of a 7-day week. He'd drop in on Sunday to see how things were going and so forth. Or they get a tough case, they'd work into the nights and so on. And he'd often take me along, in later years. I'd ride along. He was in the worst district in town, the West End, and his view was if you knew your people, well, you didn't have to worry about any matter of security among the bad people. So
this was during Prohibition, wasn't it?
It was during Prohibition. I grew up during Prohibition and during the Depression, and I think that had some influence on I went to school in high school, big city high school. We never had any crime, drugs, or there was hardly any smoking that went on, let alone alcohol in those days. So my family was quite normal. My brother was ahead of me. He was very helpful to me, and with my homework and math and science, he could always figure things out. He ended up being a lawyer, rather. And my sister was quite artistic, and she taught me a few things about arts and so on.
You were in music in high school.
I got involved with the YMCA, and they developed a band. It was pretty much like the band that was formed in Mason City.
The Music Man?
The Music Man. A local music company sent a representative to the YMCA, and they said to the parents of the kids that you buy the instrument and we'll teach you how to play it in a band. So we started off in a band.
Did you play a trombone?
And I played a trombone. And I carried that on into high school. I played in the high school band. And we also had a jazz band on the side, and I had a unsuccessful tryout with a big band, local big band, and that was sort of the end of my musical career. It's probably the best thing that ever happened to me because I don't think I really had it.
You were a drum major, though.
They used me as a drum major since I didn't play the trombone quite so well, but I was a drum major in high school and Oberlin College.
You went to Oberlin, I read, for the first couple years?
Right.
Is this where you met your wife, Dorothy?
Well, I met her there, but it was sort of as I left. I went back, I had a number of friends there, and I'd visit back at Oberlin, and I met Dorothy at that time, yeah.
When did you decide, Paul, that medicine was going to be, or you were going into medical school?
Well, that happened sometime when in my second year at Oberlin. I went to Oberlin going to be a chemist or a physicist, and I met a physician who actually was in our hometown that was in the medical school. We toured the Cincinnati Medical School, and it was about that time that I decided I would change to medicine. When I did, I left Oberlin to take another year of pre-med at Cincinnati and go to the medical school in Cincinnati. Economically, that was the only thing that I could possibly engineer.
Well, was this right? This was at the Depression time.
Right in the Depression.
So you lived at home?
And I lived at home all through high school and all through medical school, and actually until I went into the Army.
Before you went into the Army,
I had a year away in Madison at an internship at the University of Wisconsin.
So tell me about the chapter in America's history and the chapter in your life about your experiences in World War II.
Well, Dorothy and I got married on July 13th, and on the 16th I reported to my first station out in Portland, Oregon. And I had a lot of preliminary training. Went to Carlisle to learn how to be a soldier, and went down to Randolph Field to learn how to be a flight surgeon.
In San Antonio?
San Antonio. And we traveled together. We always found an apartment someplace, and we had a couple of foot lockers with our belongings in them. Our family called us the suitcase kids in those days. But we spent most of the time in Pratt, Kansas at a B-29 training station. And I finished the war off in Tucson, Arizona, which was one of the garden spots.
You had to interview young pilots, test them psychologically
we
if they
did
could fly?
psychological testing at Santa Ana for a period of about 6 weeks. After I was stationed in an operational organization, we had to re-examine the pilots and then examine all the problem crew members. We have people get airsick and people get otitis from changing altitudes, and they get a cold and their ears get plugged up. The kind of thing that some people still have even flying commercial.
Is there did you find a personality type that would make a good pilot?
Well, that was the purpose of the testing that went on. As a matter of fact, Don Lewis, professor of psychology here, was I didn't know him at that time, but in after the war, I met him and we talked it over. He had a lot to do with setting up the testing methods to try to determine who would make a good pilot, a navigator, or a bombardier. Those were the three classifications. And you had the gauge was a 9. If you had a 9 on all those, you could be any of them. But if you were below a 9, or then you would bomb out, so to speak. According to the follow-ups that I heard about, at the time they said this was a very good system to classify people, but follow-up on this objective testing showed that it wasn't quite as discriminatory as they thought it was at the time.
After the war, you decided to, you were going to specialize? You had some more training left.
I had started my residency in internal medicine in Cincinnati before I went into the service. I had 1 week, and then I had an opportunity to come back and do internal medicine residency at Cincinnati in 1946, that was.
Why did you choose allergy?
Well, I had a special interest in allergy for a couple of different reasons. One was I myself had ragweed hay fever. That's always a requirement in any subspecial selection. But when I was in college, in the summertime, I worked as a camp counselor in YMCA camps. And after I had 1 year of medicine, I was given the job as camp doctor. Of course, there was a doctor in the community that came out and really legitimized my practice. And one day we had a little guy come in who had run a nail in his foot. And of course, the treatment for that was to give anti-tetanus serum. I had never done it before, so I waited until the doctor got there. But I read about it all afternoon, how you should dilute it because some people are sensitive to it. My supervising physician had been given this stuff for years, and he never had anybody react to it. He said that isn't necessary, so we put in about 1/100th of a cc of the anti-tetanus serum in this boy's arm, and he got a very severe reaction right then with asthma, and we gave him adrenaline, and he was really quite sick for the next couple of days. We had to put him in the hospital in town. So I realized there was something to this allergic business then. But the clincher really came when I was in the service. We were giving a new vaccine. It was cholera and plague mixtured for people in our that were leaving our station in Kansas to go to the South Pacific. And it was raised on, it was grown on egg embryo. And the vaccine was given to the troops without any questioning or discrimination. And one of the boys got his shot, went back to the barracks and told his friends that these kinds of shots always bothered him a little bit, made his asthma worse, and then he died. And I had a lot of different jobs at that station. I was pathology officer, so I had to do the autopsy. It was the only autopsy I ever did before or since. And the report of that autopsy, it turned out I was the only death from that vaccine. They had a lot of reactions from it, but it was the only death. And it's a very important fact because most of the flu vaccine is given got egg albumin in it, and there are a certain number of people that are really sensitive to it, exquisitely. They can detect it in cake that's where the protein is all baked as to whether it's there or not. And so those factors, plus the fact that in my residency in internal medicine, I didn't find anybody around that knew very much about it, so I went off and took some additional training.
And it was a relatively new field, autoimmune.
Well, the more systemic involvement conditions, autoimmune diseases and so on, were really just being thought about, I should say, about that time. So it was looked upon as an expanding area of interest. And now, I used to tell my friends in medicine over here, they make fun of allergists, and I'd say, we will bury you. Well, now there isn't a disease that doesn't have some immune aspect to it.
You went back east to found a place, Roosevelt?
Roosevelt Hospital,
and studied with
right off Columbus Circle in Manhattan and Central Park. And Dorothy and I lived in an apartment over on 72nd and 3rd Avenue for a couple of years.
And you studied under Dr. Cook.
Dr. Cook. He was, Cook was one of the real pioneers in American allergy. He gave some of the first injections and created some of the first tests, but he really worked out the, in a crude way, the familial association of hay fever and asthma and family situations.
What brought you to Iowa?
Well, when I was leaving Cincinnati to go to New York, Bill Bean was being recruited to Iowa, and he was one of my instructors at Cincinnati. And when he asked me what I was going to do, and I said I was going to New York in allergy, and he said, I just came back from Iowa, and they said I have to get an allergist. I think one of the members of the recruiting team was Dean Lyerly, and he thought a lot of people had allergic problems. They didn't have anyone doing the work here. And so after I finished in New York, he recruited me out here.
And you stayed you came in 1949?
49, yeah. Armistice Day, we called it in those days, November 11th.
Well, for anybody who has allergies, that's the most devastating thing in the spring and the fall, especially in this farm state. That it's really, really a tremendous.
We call Des Moines the capital of the ragweed world. Yeah.
Oh, really? The capital of the ragweed, Des Moines. Well, tell me, you were head of the allergy section for quite a few years, but what made you decide to go into into more administration and join the dean's office?
Well, I never had any game plan. You know, they always talk about you start out a football game and the coach said, we got the game plan, we're going to do this. Well, I never had a game plan. I just sort of bounced as opportunities developed. And, if I was in the right place at the right time, my things seemed to happen. So I was bouncing along, doing my routine things in medicine. Very satisfying kind of experience here. The allergy was well accepted in the department, which it wasn't in other places in the country. So I was always grateful for that, and I always felt we had to maintain our beachhead, so to speak. But in the course of doing that, I got involved in the board system of allergy, and I was on the American Board of Internal Medicine Sub-Board of Allergy. And as chairman of that, I had to represent the group in another group, which was the American Board of Medical Specialties, which included all the specialties. And in February of 1969, the family practice people who had been trying to get a board for 10 years, and all the other specialists been putting them down, was passed at that meeting. And I came back here and told a few people like Gary Hartman and others that it looks to me like this family practice thing is really going to go this time. There have been a lot of abortive efforts to set up general practice programs, and it hadn't panned out. But this time, I said I think it's going to go. So I got ahead of a committee to do a feasibility study to see how we could set up a program here. And in the course of doing that, when Jack Eckstein went in the dean's office, this was sort of high on the list of priorities we had to do something about, and he convinced me that I should join him. I knew Jack well. He had been a resident student of mine back in the early days. We had a lot of times together in the Department of Medicine.
You got legislation from Governor Ray was governor at the time. What hurdles did you have to go over?
Well, it's like so many things. You look at it, and you look at it now and try to change something by law, and you realize that it's almost impossible unless you get an awful lot of breaks and a lot of support and so forth. The time was right. It was one of those point-in-time things. Everybody said we don't have enough doctors, and of course we don't have enough general practitioners in Iowa because of the rural nature of the state. So they were ready for something. And we had a plan that would set up a regional residency program, and the legislators were behind it. We did an investigation of what's important in locating physicians in the places where they locate. And the literature indicated that the most important thing you do is where you take your residency. your last year of residency, and it's more important in primary care than the other specialties. And it's about a 60% factor. Where you're born, where you went to medical school, or lesser factors. The big one is where you take that residency. So we drew a graph of that, presented it to the legislative committees, and Medical Society bought it, and the Academy of Family Practice bought it, and the legislature bought it right down the line, and we got a unanimous vote after 30 days of presenting it to the Congress. And with a few $100,000 to start, it wasn't enough money, but the idea was there.
And now it's taken off.
It's been quite successful. We said it would have a 60% retention.
And is it?
And darn if it didn't have a 60% retention. One of those things that we weren't too sure at the time we did it.
So it was timing, timing, timing. Perhaps this is a very naive question. Who could be against this kind of a program?
Well, it's like so many things that don't happen. It isn't so much that people are against it, but they're apathetic. Legislative, that's what happens. And then when you talk money, it's always a question of who's going to pay for it. This program, this program has a little state money in it. As a matter of fact, now it's about a $23 million program in the state. That's outside of what the university's department costs. This is the statewide system. And about 7% is state money. So it had the multiplier effect, if you will. By putting a little glue in there, we got support from the local hospitals, local support from the model practice offices that the staff has in all these programs. And we had, at that time, we had some federal grant support for all the programs, and that's the way it happened.
Looking back of all your contributions and the things you've been involved with, is this one of the things you're the most pleased about, that you've had your finger in, or are there other things too?
Well, I was pleased with it because it isn't often that you can change, societal attitudes. And medicine, as a society, had gone down the specialty route and still is going down the specialty route, although there's now a comeback to the primary care balance, if you will. That's where we came from. We came from primary care with specialization. Then we got off balance with too much specialization. And we can't give it up. We need it, but we got to balance it back again. And I suppose that worked at that particular time. And I've lived long enough to see that it worked. It isn't often you can run that kind of 25-year experiment and be there to see it, so to speak.
Unfold and be successful.
And it wasn't me, it was all the people that were involved, but we got very good cooperation.
I'd say your fingers are pretty much on this project. Looking back also in your very full life, who or what had a major influence on you, Paul? Yes, sir.
Well, I think, I got off to the right start with my family. I was never in any position to get into a lot of trouble. That's the only reason I didn't get into trouble. We lived in a somewhat isolated part of town without too big a neighborhood, and we didn't have any money. I hear a lot of people now say that my beginnings were poor, but at the time I didn't know that. Well, my beginnings were very modest. We weren't poor. There was never a question of food. But at one time, my father was the only one in the block that had a job. When somebody else got a job, and there was a big celebration. Everybody was... unemployment during the Depression was really quite evident in ordinary settings. So the family had a lot to do with it, and that led me into they supported education. My father had to quit school when he was very young, and he had to support his family. And he was certain that his sons and daughter ought to get an education theme. That's an old theme. And he thought it was great to have a doctor and a lawyer and a family. He thought that
he was covered.
So he was a great fellow. Yeah. And then professionally, I would say I had a good experience in New York with Dr. Cook. I learned a lot of things about people and how do you really manage medicine in a way that I hadn't picked up anywhere before. and grew up under rather disciplinary, very disciplined types of professors, and Dr. Blankenhorn, who was head of medicine at Cincinnati, and Dr. Middleton, who was head of medicine in Wisconsin. These were no-nonsense kind of guys, you know. I'll be there for rounds at 8 o'clock Sunday morning, and if you're late, it costs you a nickel for the candy fund, you know, things of that sort. That was Middleton. No hands in your pockets, and yes sir and no sir, things of that sort.
I know you're retired, but
and Dr. Bean was very, he made life in the Department of Internal Medicine possible for me here that I know did not exist in other institutions. He was always, he was very passive. He never told anybody what to do. That was another thing that sort
kind
of
of
fit
led
my
by
style.
example, perhaps?
Well, he had examples like not wearing socks and
Dr. Bean didn't wear socks?
no, he didn't wear socks. He was interviewed here in sandals with bare feet and smoking a corncob pipe. And
I bet there's some wonderful stories about him. If we had more time, you probably should write those down. They might get lost, some of those stories of when he first came to Iowa, because you've seen a lot of the...
Well, we talk about that. That's the trouble. Old people talk about these things, but they don't put them down.
Got to put those down. I know I started to say that you're retired, but not really. You still go to the hospital, and you're still involved in some statewide...
I'm still on a couple committees in the hospital and in the medical society.
And you're playing golf, I hear.
I play golf quite regularly, and this was a great summer to play golf, by the way. We had great weather.
My research assistant told me that in your office you have a certificate or some honor that you got a hole-in-one.
I did.
Was that in Iowa?
I was in Iowa.
You've got some witnesses, and you've got your certificate?
Two good witnesses, yes. Four good witnesses.
That's great. And your daughter lives here in town.
Yeah, Karen is married to Jack Jackson, and she lives or works right down the street here at Dane Bosworth.
That's good. You've seen so many changes over the years here at the University of Iowa, and what do you consider for you personally, have been the most significant changes over there at the university hospitals?
Well, not that I personally benefited by these things, although I guess I did, and I don't look at them in that way, but I think what the institution has done in the last 25 years or 30 years maybe has been tremendous. And the growth of the faculty has been the key to it, the growth of high-quality people, because the support of an institution like this is a lot of people think the state supports it, but when you get to the medical school and the hospital, the things that they do support it. And in the case of academic people in the college, the research support is a very important component. And right now, the practice of medicine and the revenue generated from that is another very important component. And for the hospital, it's the same thing with providing service. Well, to have the people that are capable to do that, to have assembled them here, and they've assembled, of course, bit by bit, is just fantastic. I think if you talk to the new leadership that's come in, which incidentally is very, very good. We finally got it done. You know, we finally got a director of the hospital and the dean of the medical school and vice president for health affairs. People that really top of the selection list all the way around. I think if you talk to them, that they'll say they're pleased to come into the situation as it now exists. Now they're going to have problems because everything cycles in, but I think to have it get better, it's like Iowa City. Iowa City keeps getting better. Ever since we've been here, something's a little bit better. Even the street lights get, you know, a lot of things get better.
It's a great place to live and work, isn't it?
Right.
Well, Dr. Seebohm, it's been wonderful to have you here today. I appreciate you being a guest.
Well, it's been a pleasant time to visit with you.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Dr. Paul Seebohm, Emeritus Professor in the College of Medicine at the University of Iowa. For over 4 decades, he influenced programs and services on the local, state, and national level. He is one of the country's leading allergists and was named president of the American Academy of Allergy in 1966. Serving on numerous committees, his attributes of patience, integrity, unselfish service, and consensus building have benefited many individuals and institutions. Dr. Seebohm received dozens and dozens of honors from local, state, and national organizations and universities, the most recent being the 1994 Iowa Medical Society Distinguished Service Award, which is given only about every 10 years. If 2 words could describe my guest's medical career, they are distinguished service. Dr. Paul Seebohm is one of a kind.